Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I am so excited for today's video. I am going to be tier ranking every single palette that is currently available at Sephora that I have tried. I have never done one of these like tier ranking style videos before, so it's gonna be interesting. And I'm filming this before work, so I'm like feeling like, I'm not feeling super rushed, but I'm like, I haven't like planned out where I'm gonna place these palettes in each of the tiers too. So this is going to be like, we're seeing it together for the first time, like just true candid feelings about each of these palettes, and I'm so excited for it. I'm hoping I can figure out how to edit this in the correct manner, etc. And I'm hoping to get this up before the Sephora VIB sale. I did post my Sephora VIB recommendations, but I did not talk about eyeshadow palettes at all in it because I knew I was planning this video and you could kind of get my thoughts on every single palette available at Sephora. If you end up liking this, I would love to do more tier ranking videos in the future, so let me know what other tier ranking style videos you'd like to see from me in the comments. Shameless plug, I keep saying this, if you have not yet watched my Sephora VIB sale shop with me, I would love if you would go check that video out and give me your feedback on what products you think I should pick up during the sale and what you think I should skip. All of the Sephora VIB sale information will be in my description box down below. I would also love to know if you plan on shopping the sale or if you're gonna skip it altogether. That being said, I have to get to work in a little bit, so we need to get into this video. If you're interested in seeing how I would tier rank all of the palettes that are currently available at Sephora that I personally have ever tried, stay tuned. First, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel and you like project panning content, palette themed content, or just chit-chatting about makeup, I'd love if you'd consider subscribing before moving on. And other than that, let's jump into the video. I think my desktop is recording. Are these really all of the palettes? I think I have 56 palettes, and if I've missed some, to put this together and search like every image of every palette and try and like coordinate it all was very difficult for me. So you guys, if I'm missing certain palettes, I do apologize. And there are certain palettes that I thought were still available at Sephora. One example would be the Huda Beauty Mercury Retrograde, and I didn't see it available at Sephora, and now I'm like, oh, I still have it. I'm like, I have the nude medium, but I don't have the nude rich. I think I am missing a few palettes, but just bear with me. Okay, so here are the different tiers. I have 6 different tiers I decided on. The top tier being God tier. This is like the best of the best. I truly couldn't live without this palette. After that is a holy grail, just a staple favorite in my collection, like never does me dirty. I can always rely on this palette. After that is love it but don't reach for it enough, and this is a palette that lies in my collection, and I really do enjoy and like this palette, but I just don't reach for it that frequently. So in my head I'm like, well, how much do I really like love it, you know? Next we have I like it, which is just what it sounds like I like the palette, but it's, you know, I like it. And then after that is meh, like there's definitely better out there. And then the worst category, the final category, is please don't buy this. And like I said, I haven't really planned out where any of these palettes are gonna go, so let's just start. And it's like not in any particular order, and now that I'm looking through, I really hope I didn't miss any. I'm like, this doesn't look like every single palette, but we're just gonna roll with it. You know, there's quite a few palettes for me to rank for you here anyway, so take it or leave it. Let's start with the first palette. This is the Lawless, the baby one eyeshadow palette, and I really enjoy the majority of Lawless palettes. I also personally typically like a smaller palette like this. I just find it easier to work with. I get more excited to reach for some of my smaller palettes. So I'm gonna rank this one in love it but don't reach for it enough. When I first got this palette, I was reaching for this literally all the time. And then I don't know if like in my mind I got burnt out from this palette, but I just like stopped using it. But I still really enjoy the palette. I love the shimmers, especially like the bottom shimmer all the way to the left. I love it so much. So that's where I'm gonna leave that one. Next up we have one of the Patrick Ta palettes. I'm trying to tell, I think this is the Rosy, the Patrick Ta Major Dimension 2 palette. For this one, I'm gonna also put this in love it but don't reach for it enough. I really do enjoy this palette. I definitely prefer the Major Dimension 1. I definitely prefer the Major Dimension 1 to the Major Dimension 2. But I still think it's a great palette. I just don't reach for it all that frequently. I do like rosy eyeshadows. I like more like mauve-y shadows when I'm reaching for like the pink sort of family. I definitely reach more, like I enjoy more like dusty pink or like mauve-y pinks as opposed to like rosy pinks. So that could be another reason that I just don't reach for this palette enough, but I still really like this palette. Definitely recommend it, even for the price point. Then we have such a classic. It is the ABH Modern Renaissance. I have owned this in the past. I did end up decluttering it just because I felt like there wasn't necessarily a place for it in my collection anymore. I'm going to put this in I like it. Because even when I had this palette, I didn't reach for it. I'm so sorry, you guys. I'm so congested. Even when I owned this palette, I liked it, but I didn't love it. And I think part of that is because there were some of those like brighter pink shades that I just don't really reach for ever. So I'm gonna put that in I like it. If you want like a rosy palette, I would recommend the Patrick Ta Major Dimension 2 over the ABH Modern Ren. Next up we have ABH Norvina, and I'm also gonna put this in I like it. This palette was a bit of a letdown to me. I was so excited when this palette released. I loved the color story. I loved everything about this palette. But every time I go to use this palette, I've gone in with like a pretty specific look in mind, and it never turns out how I originally intended it to, and I never like it as much as I think I'm going to. There's definitely some shades that are like a letdown in this palette. I think it's Soul, that like pastel purple shade I was super excited for, and it just looks very like ashy on my eyelids. So for me, the Norvina was a bit of a letdown. I don't think it's like meh level, but it's also not love it level. Next up we have my Artist Couture Supreme Nudes, and I'm putting this in God tier. This is one of my absolute favorite palettes of all time. It is like the perfect color story, like my perfect color story. Very neutral with a pop of green, which I love. I love the sleek packaging. I love how easy these mattes blend together. Like truly, this is like tippity top, the best of the best. Like there's not a whole lot out there that I think is better. That being said, this, I can't remember, it's I think it's like the Nudie Snack palette by Artist Couture. I'm gonna put this in meh. First of all, 4 of the shades are overlapping from the Artist Couture Supreme Nudes palette, which I didn't realize when I purchased this. But also, I just did not feel like the quality in this palette was anywhere close to the quality in the Supreme Nudes palette. I felt like these were very chalky and did not blend together how I remember them blending together. I actually ended up decluttering this palette because it just was like I didn't need it. So I'm gonna put that in meh. And then the Artist Couture Supreme Mauves palette, everything's kind of like all over the board for Artist Couture. I'm gonna put this in please don't buy this. This was such a letdown. I was super excited for this palette because again, I really do enjoy like mauve toned shadows, and I really, up until that point, I'd had really good luck with Artist Couture palettes, and again, these, like the mattes were just chalkier and more dusty than I remember, and they would literally not blend together. It was like you could see one color not fading into the next. It was very unflattering. And then the more like metallic or sparkly shades were just very chunky, didn't stick or didn't adhere to the eyes very well, and it just kind of is like a mess of a palette. This is a palette that's currently on my chopping block, and I actually think I will end up decluttering this one just because I do not think the quality is there. And then ending on a high note for Artist Couture, this is the Supreme Bronze palette. I'm gonna put this in Holy Grail. I definitely reach for my Supreme Nudes the most, but during the summertime and when I'm wanting a bronze moment, the Supreme Bronze palette from Artist Couture is very, 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 very good. Blends really well together. It's like the good Artist Couture quality. Again, I love Artist Couture's packaging, like A++ in terms of packaging. It's just very sleek and very thin, and I just absolutely love it. And then I do really love the color story of this Supreme pop. I like that you have like this pop of bright yellow, and it's also this pop of orange. It's a really fun kind of take on a bronze palette, and if you're looking for a good bronze palette, especially because this is the spring Sephora VIB sale, I would recommend the Supreme Bronze. Moving on to Huda Beauty. Ooh, I haven't even like thought about how I'm gonna rank some of these. The Naughty. I'm thinking through all of my Huda palettes. The Naughty, I'm gonna put this in Love It, but Don't Reach for It Enough. This is one that, like, in theory, I really do love this palette. Every time I reach for it, I really enjoy the looks that I've created, but I don't reach for it all that frequently. So I feel like this is the perfect category for it to fall in. The Huda Haze palette. Please don't buy this. Huda Beauty, especially, it's usually her larger palettes. Her first few larger palettes, definitely not the best quality, but basically since Mercury retrograde on, I've never had bad luck with her larger palettes. But her Obsessions palettes are very, 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 very hit or miss in my opinion. Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, ooh, I don't think I have like the Jaguar. You guys, if I'm missing palettes, I know I'm like overthinking this and stressing way too much about this, but if I'm missing some palettes, I am so sorry. And I can do an updated version of this maybe 6 months from now. But the Haze palette was so bad, and I was so excited for the Haze palette because it was this beautiful like brownie green, kind of like reminded me of like an army green sort of color story with like this fun pop of purple. And it was so bad. Again, the mattes just did not blend well together, but on top of that, the shimmer shades, which I was most excited for, just were so lackluster and just very disappointing, especially considering Huda Beauty is just known for and does so well different tones and textures and metallics and foiled, like just so many different formulas that typically perform really well, and the Haze palette was just not it. Next we have the Urban Decay Naked Wild West palette. I'm gonna put this in I Like It. It's a good palette, but it's just kind of boring in my opinion. I was very excited when this palette first released. I was so excited about the color story, and then I got it and I was just like, meh. But it's not like meh because I think the quality is good. It's just like not exciting, not inspiring to reach for. But if you're looking for just like a day-to-day solid palette with like a pop of blue, that's a great palette. Tartelette in Bloom by Tarte, God tier. Love this palette. It does not do me wrong. This is a palette that I owned for a long time, decluttered because it was getting so old, and this is the first palette in my life, with the exception of potentially Urban Decay Naked 2 back in like college years. This is the first palette in my life I've ever repurchased. So if that tells you something, if you are looking for just a very simple palette that, like, I mean, your looks, like you can just follow the rows or follow the columns. It's just such a good palette, very easy to use, beginner friendly, day-to-day, like a comfort palette, kind of like a sweatpants of makeup sort of eyeshadow palette. It's just so good. Highly recommend that one. Next up, we have the Charlotte Tilbury Quad in Pillow Talk, or just Charlotte Tilbury Quad in general. I'm putting this in meh. Even though the quality is good, like I could say like I like it, it's just not worth the money. It's like literally just not worth it. Like I would say please don't buy this. Like for this one, like it's meh. Like it's meh, but the Dazzling Eyes, please don't buy that. I think it's $75 for 6 pans of eyeshadow. I didn't love the color story. Like it was like this rosy pink. Quality was fine, but like please don't buy this. You can spend your $75 on just so many other better things in my opinion. That's where I'm going with that. Then I have the Naked Reloaded palette from Urban Decay. I'm gonna put this in meh. I owned this quite a few years ago and I was so excited for this. I felt like the color story was just like my type of color story, but the formula in this palette was just super inconsistent. There were some shades that worked really well, and then there were other shades that like didn't work well at all, and it's more expensive. I mean, I know you can always find this palette on sale at this point in time, but I just feel like there's like, you could just buy the Artist Couture Supreme Nudes. Okay. Moving on to quite a few of my Pat McGrath palettes. This is gonna be difficult. So, and I can't remember specifically what all of these are. I think this is the Mothership 1 or 2. This is like the very cool toned one. I recently got this like December 30th of 2022, and I really haven't used this one yet. So I'm gonna put this in I Like It, because for all of the Pat McGrath Mothership palettes, I mean, I like them. And we'll get into more of them. This is the Mothership 10. I'm gonna also put this in I Like It. I also purchased this December 30th of last year and really haven't tested this enough to know either way. Then we have the Supreme Bronze Palette. I'm gonna put this in Holy Grail. Not quite God tier because I just feel like for the price, like I just get this on sale. Like never pay full price for a Pat McGrath palette. Just wait for, especially on her, like not even like Sephora VIB sale, just wait for her to have like a 25, 30 or 40% off sale on her website. December 30th of last year, she had 40% off on her website and I couldn't believe it. And so I love this palette. I love the special shades. I absolutely live for the green shade in this palette. It has brown mattes, which are more of my thing, and then it has a really beautiful gold shade as well. I love this palette. I really do. I just can't put it in God tier because thinking about someone paying full price for it, I just do not think it's worth it. So we're leaving it in Holy Grail. Then we have the, I think this is the this was number 6, I think. What do I want to do with this one? I'm going to put this in I Like It. I was thinking about matte, but it's really just like a color story thing for me. Like, it's a good palette. The quality is good, but I just wasn't like super inspired by the color story with this one. So, but I do think if you really like dusty purple mauves, this would be like the perfect palette for you. The special shades are really fun. There's some really sparkly shades in it. It's like, it's a good palette. I just wasn't super inspired by the color story. Then we have, I think this is number 3, but I could be wrong. I'm also going to put this in I Like It. This one has, a lot of Pat McGrath palettes lean more rosy. This one had like some brown matte shades in it, so I do appreciate that. And I do like that deep green shade, but I don't feel like I've ever felt so inspired to just create like one look with this palette, or even like, it's not like the Bronze Seduction palette where I'll create a look and then I'm like, ooh, I want to reach into Bronze Seduction just to like top this look with that green shade. Like I'll think about Bronze Seduction all of the time, even if I'm not basing my look, even if I'm not starting a look with that palette or really using that palette to create a look. Whereas the other Pat McGrath palettes so far in this I Like It tier, I'm not like thinking about in the same way that I think about Bronze Seduction. I hope that makes somewhat of sense. Next up I have Pat McGrath Utopian. I'm gonna put this in Love It, but Don't Reach for It Enough. This palette I just completed in my No Pan Left Behind, which that update I have filmed, but it's coming after this week. And this is a fun palette. And I don't feel like I've done enough or played around with this palette enough to really love it for what it is. And I've mentioned many times on my channel, Pat McGrath palettes really, like the more I use them, the more I fall in love with them. So perhaps this palette could even, you know, rise up to like Holy Grail status at some point, but I just haven't reached for this enough in its lifetime to put it above Love It, but I do love it. There's some, like, I love the purple shade. I love the special shades in this palette a lot. And even that peach matte I used as like a really bright blush one day. And I'm gonna do that more this summer because I thought it gave this really beautiful sunburn effect to the cheek. And I've been having so much fun this year trying to like repurpose makeup in ways that maybe it wasn't like sold with the intention for, and having fun with eyeshadow as blush is one of the things that I've been doing this year, and I really enjoyed that. So we're putting Utopian in Love It, but Don't Reach for It Enough. Next up we have the Rare Beauty Discovery palette. I'm between Meh and Please Don't Buy. I'm gonna I feel bad, but I'm gonna put this in Please Don't Buy It. I just was not a fan. First of all, the color story confused me a bit. And I felt like the packaging was like a little bit cheaper than I expected. And then there was only one shade I really ended up loving in the palette. And I ended up decluttering this because I just wasn't impressed at all. And I feel like there's just better palettes. Like there are so many other great products that Rare Beauty produces or makes or has in their range. Eyeshadow has just not been it for me from Rare Beauty. Oh boy, we are on to the bulk of my Natasha Denona palettes. This is going to be difficult too. Okay, we have the retro. Is it just the retro, right? Where do I want to put this one? Okay, where do I want to put retro? I'm between Love It But Don't Reach for It Enough and I Like It. I'm gonna put it in love it but don't reach for it enough, because I do really enjoy the quality of this one. I just don't reach for it that frequently because it's not every day that I'm doing a mauve toned look, and that's really why. If you like mauve shadows and you think you're going to create a mauve look just about every day, I highly recommend this palette. I do think it's really great, but I'm just not reaching for mauves on like an everyday or even like every week. It's definitely a very seasonal sort of look for me for the most part. So we're gonna go with love it but don't reach for it enough. Same for the My Dream. Love it but don't reach for it enough. I should reach for this one more. There is a duochrome or like a multi-chrome shade in this My Dream palette that like isn't as good as I was like. If you're purchasing this just for the multi-chrome, there's better, like purchase something from an indie brand. But overall, I do like this palette and I've created some really fun looks. It's just not a palette I'm going to be reaching for on an everyday basis. Then we have the Retro Glam palette. I'm also going to put this in love it but don't reach for it enough. This is just newer to my collection and I haven't played around with it enough, but I did include this in palettes that I want to include in my spring palette rotation. So I'm excited to continue to get more use out of that. Perhaps, you know, any one of these Natasha Denona palettes could eventually move up in the ranks, but this is where they're currently at. Then we have the Natasha Denona Mini Nude palette, and this is God tier in my mind. This is like a favorite palette in my collection, even though it's only 5 shades. Like, this palette never does me dirty. I can always rely on this palette. I'm gonna quit recording on me because it's been going for too long. Also, I feel like I need to reapply my lip. The Natasha Denona Mini Nude, like, I say this now, but I would be really sad, but if this was the only palette in my life, like, I could make it work and it would be okay, but I'd be sad. Then we have the Mini Glam palette. I'm gonna put this in I like it. Like, I do like it, but I just don't think the quality, like, there's better quality palettes, and I'm not super inspired by this 5-pan color story. And then we have the Mini Love palette. I'm also gonna put this in like it. I really like the like lightest shade for an inner corner highlight. The rest of the palette is like I could take it or leave it, so we're gonna put it there. And then we have the Mini Retro palette. I'm gonna put this in Holy Grail. I do really like this palette. I don't reach for it enough. So I feel like I really should put it in love it but don't reach for it, but I really do like this. Is like it is a Holy Grail. Like, the Dusty Mauve shade in this palette has a pan. It's like one of my favorites in my entire collection. It's just like a matter of me thinking about reaching for this more, but I'm leaving it in Holy Grail and you can't tell me differently, okay? Then I have the Mini Biba. I'm gonna put this in love it but don't reach for it enough, because that's how I feel about it. I just think if I was reaching for a 5-pan Natasha Denona Mini to create like a warm look, I'm reaching for the Mini Nude. Do you know what I mean? Next we have this Nars Rising Orgasm, and this is tough because Nars palettes, you know, are typically always pretty much limited edition. This reminds me a lot of the Summer Solstice palette from 2 years ago. I haven't owned this in my collection that long yet. I'm gonna put this in Holy Grail. It's a Holy Grail, potentially like God tier, but I haven't owned it for that long, so I'm just gonna put it in Holy Grail for right now. Then we have the Lawless Mini Glam palette, and I am gonna put this in love it but don't reach for it enough. Great palette. Again, love the Lawless shimmers, and I love the matte color story in this palette as well. I feel like it, like, for being an 8-pan eyeshadow palette, it offers like a good range of different looks you can do. So that one is love it but don't reach for it enough. Next up we have Melt Mary Jane. Oh my gosh, what do I even do with this palette? This is like the most difficult palette to work with in my collection, but you always get a great look with it. I'm gonna put it in meh, but please don't buy this if you're gonna get frustrated by how long and how messy your look is gonna take to create with this palette. That's all I'm gonna say. Then we have the Melt Earth palette, which I actually really have enjoyed. Do I put this in I like it, or do I put it in love it but don't reach for it enough? I'm gonna put it in I like it just because of the color story. I don't feel like this is something that like would be something even I would reach for very frequently. Like, I would be very specifically wanting a look to reach into this palette. It's great quality. After purchasing and using this one and testing out, it made me want to purchase other palettes in this collection. But it's not like love it but don't reach for it enough, because it's not a palette that I feel I would be reaching for like to create work looks or things like that. So this is where this one's gonna fall. Maybe I'll change my mind someday, but for right now, I still think it's great quality though. I want to like leave you with that. Then we have the Melt Rust palette. I'm gonna say I like it. Melt's formula, I just feel like, is not beginner friendly. I feel like it takes more time to work with the shadows, to blend your look. Like your look is just gonna take more time to create. And while I still love the looks that I create with just about every Melt palette I own, it just takes more time. So I don't know that they can make it above the I like it. This is the Gemini 2. I'm putting this in Meh. Is that the Gemini? Nope, sorry. This is the Gemini, which I'm going to put in I like it. I kind of want to put this one in I love it because the color story I do really love. Like I love, but again, it just takes so much time to create looks with that palette. So we're going to put it in I like it. I'm going to put the Gemini 2 in Meh. Was not a huge fan of this color story, and I think a huge part of that is just because there's a lot of like rosy pink tones, which as I mentioned just aren't my jam. The Melt Smoke Sessions. I love this one. Like I love, because it's mostly shimmers with 2 mattes. I'm never reaching for this palette just on its own. It's just for the shimmers. I'm gonna put it in I like it. I feel like it can't go higher than that. The She's in Parties I'm gonna put in Meh. Just not a color, like it's too deep, too dark. It's grungy purples, which usually if I'm doing like a purple or a mauve, it's not this like very grungy look. So this just is not the palette for me. So we're gonna put that in Meh. Next we have the Pat McGrath Interstellar Icon Quad. I'm gonna put this in Love It But Don't Reach For It Enough. I really do love this quad. I think it is absolutely beautiful. I just simply don't reach for it enough. Then we have the Too Faced Peach palette. Was it Peach Perfect? I can't remember. This palette I don't own anymore, but I loved it back in the day. Like loved this palette, and then it just got old. I think I'm gonna put this in Love It But Don't Reach For It Enough, because if I still had this in my collection, it would be a palette that like I would reach for work looks, and it would likely just be sitting in my collection. Like I do really love this palette, but I just don't reach for it enough. Then we have the Lawless The One eyeshadow palette. This is the large palette. I'm putting this in Please Don't Buy This. I have had really good luck with the Lawless smaller palettes, but this larger palette was terrible quality in my opinion. Very like chalk dusty kind of shadows, and just did not blend together well at all. I can think of numerous occasions I was creating a look with this palette that I had to wipe my makeup off, or was just so frustrated in the way that my look was turning out. I felt like the shades muddied together, and this was like a neutral palette, so I don't feel like it should have been too difficult to create. I was just very unimpressed with that palette. Next we have the Patrick Ta Major Dimension 1. I'm gonna put this in, do I put this in God tier or Holy Grail? I'm gonna put this, I'm gonna put this in Holy Grail just because I don't feel like in my mind this is God tier just yet. I do love that there are those cream shadows. I actually really ended up loving the cream shadows in this palette, which I did not think was gonna like happen for me. And I love the different textures and finishes in like the top row of shades. The mattes are so easy to work with, blend very well together. But I just, looking at like my God tier palettes and my Patrick Ta Major Dimension, I get just a little bit more excited for these 3 over this. That could change though with me reaching for this more. So maybe my opinion will change and this palette will be bumped up in the future, but for right now it's Holy Grail. I'm gonna say the same for the ABH, why not Subculture, why can't I think of the name of this? Soft Glam palette. I ended up decluttering this because this was older in my collection, and I also have the Novelist Side by Side palette, and the 2 are very similar. But this palette had, at least half the palette I'm pretty sure had pans in it when I ended up decluttering it. I decluttered it to my mom, and I was home like a couple of weekends ago and actually asked her if I could have this palette back? To which she said yes, and I actually like may have this. I can't remember, it might be floating around in my car right now, because I really did love this palette. Like that mulberry shade too, like you really cannot go wrong with this palette, especially if you're looking for a palette that's going to give you really beautiful like warm brown looks that you can like mix in some reddish tones to. It's a great palette, so that's where we're gonna go with that. I feel like I'm not loving my hair. My ponytail needs to be like spunkier. Okay, we're almost done. So next up we have the ABH Nuevo palette. I'm gonna put it in Love It But Don't Reach For It Enough. Really beautiful palette, came out last year. Was actually really impressed that I felt like ABH kind of did something different. I loved the color story, love that lavender shade. There is a shade in here that's like this champagne with like almost like pink and blue sparkle in it. I just love that shade. I've never been disappointed in a look that I've created with this, but I just don't reach for it that much. I have a large collection, so really for me to like reach for a palette a lot, like it has to be holy grail or god tier status. So just setting that precedent. Next up we have the Huda Beauty Rose Quartz palette. I'm putting this in Love It But Don't Reach For It Enough. I do really like this palette, but it is more pink toned and it's like a lighter pink, so I really have to be in the mood to create a very specific look, or at least that's how I've felt so far. So we're putting it in Love It But Don't Reach For It Enough. Next up we have Urban Decay Naked Honey. I'm gonna put it in I Like It. I like this palette. I don't reach for it enough. I don't know that I love this palette, but don't reach for it enough. So we're putting it in I Like It. Then we have the Huda Beauty Nude Medium. I'm gonna put this in Love It But Don't Reach For It Enough. I also have the Nude Rich palette, which I love but don't reach for enough. These were this collection, this nude collection by Huda Beauty. She killed it. This was like her top tier formula in her mini Obsessions palette. So if you've been looking at any of the nude Obsessions palettes, I highly recommend. Next up we have the Too Faced Born This Way. I think it's the Natural Nudes palette. I'm gonna put in Love It But Don't Reach For Enough. Solid palette. You have neutrals, warm browns, and then like mauvey pinks, so you can get like a good range of looks if you travel a lot for work, or if you just travel a lot and you like neutral eyeshadow. I feel like this is a great palette for you to have in your collection. It's a really good palette. I just have a large collection and it hasn't made it to like holy grail status, so I just don't reach for it enough. Then we have this Pat McGrath quad. Is it the Voyeuristic Vixen? I think that's what it's called. I'm gonna put it in I Like It. It's too overpriced for it. You get like one special. It's fine. I would almost put it in meh, but like I do like it. Like I really like the special shade in it. It can really like give you like a va va voom sort of like eye look with just one shade. But like just buy an indie single shadow, you know? Next up we have the Natasha Denona Biba palette. I'm gonna put this in I Like It. I do like it. I just like don't reach for this enough at all to even like bump it up to like Love It But Don't Reach For It Enough. And like I should reach for this more because it is a very neutral palette. It's a larger palette and it is more expensive. I think if you look at that color story and say I'm gonna use every single shade every day of my life, it would be worth it, especially if you're getting it on sale. Like get it on sale. But for me it's just like I haven't used it enough to bump it up any higher. Next up we have the Natasha Denona Mini Gold. I'm gonna have to put this in meh. I was not impressed with this palette. The only shade I really like, or the two shades I would say, are the two shimmers. Like I do like that shimmery gold, but I don't reach for a gold that often. And I do really like the shimmery or the foiled green, but like I've considered decluttering this multiple times. I don't like the lightest shade is like this like khaki light beige, and it just looks not good, and I don't like the matte green either, so we're gonna stick with meh for that. Next up we have the Natasha Denona Mini Pastel. This is new to my collection. So I want to put it in, I'm gonna put it in Love It. Like I really enjoyed using this, and I think I'll get some good use out of this. I was going between Love It But Don't Reach For It Enough and I Like It, but I really enjoyed the looks that I create, and think even for like creating like a neutral look and like popping that like goldy green foiled shade, like I think I'll get a lot of use out of that, as well as the pink and potentially even that blue shimmer. We're putting it here. We're putting it in there. Next up we have the Makeup by Mario Ethereal Eyes palette. Please, dear God, do not buy this eyeshadow palette. I believe it's $68, and while I do think the only four shimmery special shades, if you will, are beautiful, the formula of the mattes is just not good. If you are doing, and I think maybe this palette was created to just have like 1 or 2 mattes and then do one of the sparkles, like, yes, you can get it to work, but like, I just was not a fan of this eyeshadow palette, and I was so excited when this released. I purchased this, I believe, on release day. I literally was so excited about it, and the like, just no, like, just no. That's all I have to say. And then we're gonna end with the Huda Beauty Empowered palette, and I am gonna put this in, Love It, but don't reach for it enough. This is something that I could see ending up in Holy Grail in the future. I just haven't reached for it enough in its lifetime. This is definitely something a little bit different than what Huda's done in years past with her larger palettes, in that this palette definitely goes deeper, and I was a little bit nervous about that in the beginning, but there are like, this palette is so beautiful, and even some of the like shimmer shades or foiled metallic shades that I did not think I was gonna love, I really ended up enjoying. That gold specifically, or even the shade that like has, it's like one of those weird shades that she does. It has this like weird like petri dish jelly running through the center, and then on either side it's like this, I'm trying to look at it, it's like this like reddy purple metallic. It's so pretty. Like, I love the different textures of the metallic special shades in this palette. It's good. It is good. If that color story works for you, I definitely do recommend that palette. But after that, you guys, this is how we ended up for tier ranking every single palette that I've tried at Sephora. Would love your comments down below. Again, if you have other tier ranking, this was fun. Like, this was actually so fun, and I'm annoyed that I've waited this long to tier rank something, because I had so much fun doing this. So let me know what you want me to tier rank next. Or do you never want me to tier rank anything ever again? Let me know in the comments. Let me know if you plan to pick up any palettes during the Sephora VIB sale. Currently, the only palette, I believe, that's in my cart is the Lawless Lavender palette. So excited for that palette, but I'm also proud of myself that that's, I think, the only palette that I'm going to be picking up. So thank you guys so much for sticking around to watch, for sticking around to hang out with me. I love you guys so much, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye.